Hello Internet. This is a bit of a tutorial how you might want to convert your Riverpod 1 syntax to Riverpod 2. Now Riverpod 2 has been out for a while now. I've been using it for a long time, but there are a few things I haven't really been making use of because I was so set in my ways. Now call out to Randall Swartz, who has been commenting on some of my videos and posts about doing things properly.
I'm seeing many new projects and tutorials that are using Riverpod. This is good. However, many are still using the legacy Riverpod providers, State Provider, State Notifier Provider, and Change Notifier Provider.
And I was like, no, I love the way I'm doing it. But I ended up watching one of his presentations, and it really just clicked with me recently, like how these things can be an advantage to us.
If you are a content producer, please stop putting these providers into new content.
So I'm going to kind of show how to do that. I'm going to be using a project that I did a video series for about a month ago. So this is kind of a follow-up to that, but it is a standalone, can work because I'm sure you have projects that you're using Riverpod on, and maybe you haven't gotten to the new one. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So just to show you what this app is, and again, you can watch the original video series just to kind of get up to speed, but it's just a basic CRUD app where we have some network requests in order to get a list of games, be able to get a detail of a game, be able to edit a game, my game 2 we'll call it, and see that everything is good. So yeah, pretty simple app. There's some good stuff going on. I definitely recommend watching this video. It's still very relevant, especially if you come back and watch this part on how you can just make it a little bit better with the new things in Riverpod. And by new, I mean this stuff's a year old now, but it's really awesome. So let's start. I'm going to open up my game list provider. So this is just a very basic state notifier. And we're going to start just by taking this one step by kind of showing you a new way to do this. And then we're going to take it to the next further step and actually use some generators. So this is just a very basic provider. It is getting a list of games from a network call, and it is essentially updating the state based on those games. So what we can do is we can actually change this just to notifier instead of state notifier. And then we're actually going to get rid of our constructor here. And we're going to override the build function. So sometimes you might get the IntelliSense, but otherwise override and then build. And we'll want to return something here. Now we have to say what we're going to be returning, and it's always going to conform to whatever our notifier's state is. So in this case, we would do this. And for the case of this, we're just going to return an empty list because we haven't made the network call. We're good. We just want to do that. Now, because in my constructor I do have a load function, I do need to call this in the build. This is kind of replacing our constructor. Now, I'm not awaiting this because this is just a synchronous code, but I am going to call it, return immediately, an empty list, and then eventually this will, do its thing and replace the state. So we just have to remember to, when we are doing this sort of migration, to make sure anything in our constructor we are somewhat making use of. Now, the next thing we can do is we can change game list provider state notifier just to notifier provider, simply like that. Everything else stays the same except within these brackets here. Instead of getting access to the ref and then returning this again, all we actually do is take our game list provider and go .new. So I'll save that, and we'll let it save. Now we will have to do probably a green arrow refresh for these kind of changes, and we'll see we still have our list and it's coming back and everything's good. Okay, cool. So let's take this one step further now because there's still a little bit of boilerplate that we can eliminate. So we're going to install a few other packages here that you may not already have. So what I want to install is Riverpod annotation. So we'll just do flutter pub add Riverpod annotation. We're also going to install the generator, so Riverpod _ generator. And I'm also going to recommend installing Riverpod lint, just so you get really good linting to do with anything to do with these generators. Okay. So what we can do now, and just keep in mind what I just showed, you don't necessarily have to do this first and then you can do this all in one step. I just kind of wanted to show like this is a nice way of doing things. But a really good way of doing things is we are going to use some annotations. So what we first want to do is we want to import in Riverpod annotations. So that's the package we just installed. And then we're going to mark this class using uppercase Riverpod. And there's a reason I'm doing the uppercase one. It's because I want to set a specific parameter here. I want to do keep alive true in this case. And this basically just means it's not going to like auto dispose, because I don't really want this to dispose when no one's listening to me anymore, because I want this state to always just kind of remain. It's kind of like a global state of the app. In the case that it was a provider that you wanted to auto dispose, you can still do this. You can do keep alive false, or you can actually just use the lowercase Riverpod annotation like that. And that's kind of just using the default one. But I want keep alive true, so I am going to use the uppercase one here. You'll also notice I'm getting some squiggles here, and that's because once we've imported in Riverpod annotation, we don't actually have to also import Riverpod, so I can get rid of that, which is nice. Now, what I'm going to do here is, instead of extending this, we are going to extend a generated class. So a lot like freezed, which is also covered in this, we can just basically go game list provider here, and when we run our build runner, it will go and do the things. Now, something to note, it's going to automatically create a class name called whatever this is, plus the word provider after it. So by calling this game list provider, our variable, our singleton essentially, will be called game list provider, which we don't really want. So I'm actually going to rename this here and rename it here. And then we're going to get rid of this. We don't even need this anymore, and you'll see why. So I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to run my build runner. Now you can do this the normal way you'd run a build runner by typing in the command. It's a really long, annoying command, but I have a VS Code package that lets us actually just run it. And I can also watch with this too, which I'm going to recommend, especially when you're doing like this in a bunch of files, because now it'll take a little bit of time the first one because it's figuring out everything. But as it's watching, it'll be just running the generator for the files that change. So it's a lot faster moving forward. So I'm going to be watching for the rest of this. And yeah, it's a little bit slow on the first one, but we're almost there. There's one very important step I missed. Similar to freeze, we also need to say this is part of a file. So I'm going to take the name of this file, gamelistprovider.dart, but I'm actually going to put a .g right there. So it's going to essentially generate a new file. And because I was watching, this was a lot faster. So you'll see it actually made this file for us, which is just sort of like the generated code for this. And what's cool here is, I don't have this anymore. This is now part of the generated file, right? Game list provider right here, named it the same way. And if I actually go to my component that's watching this, which is my game list component here, you'll see, hey, it's still, I didn't have to like import in anything, because by importing in the file that it already was importing, which is this one right here, it automatically is importing this one too, because they're part of the same file from Dart's perspective. Therefore, like, this migration is pretty easy. You don't have to go through and rename things, assuming you do them properly, and you don't have to even like change the file paths, because the same files will still conform. So let's just do a green arrow rebuild, and we'll go back here, and we still see our list is working as expected. So I can actually get rid of this code that I just commented out. So that's a lot, a lot cleaner now. Almost half the length of boilerplate code we would have to write. And what's cool is we didn't even have to denote like, oh, what's the type of state, because our build method actually returns a certain state, and Riverpod generator is smart enough to go, hey, okay, this is going to be managing this kind of state. So yeah, that's cool. Let's do this again for another file. So if you've watched the other video, there's also a form that we can modify. So I'm going to skip right to the next one here. So we'll actually just open this for a reference. It's pretty similar. So we'll just do Riverpod, and we'll do keep alive for this too, because this is just a singleton, and the way I've kind of architected this, we don't actually have multiple instances of it or like a family. So what we'll do here now is we're going to remove the state notifier, and we're going to go right to calling this game form provider. Similarly though, I want to get rid of the word provider because otherwise we're going to get the double provider when it gets generated. And I'll just rename this here. Now, what else do we have to do here? Well, we're going to get rid of this at the bottom because it's going to get auto-generated for us. We also need to do this part, so I'm just going to actually copy this one and try not to make a mistake here. So this would be game form provider. So I'm still keeping my file names with the word provider in it, just to help me as a developer, but it's I'm not keeping the classes like that. Now, what we need to do is make our build function, which is kind of going to replace this stuff here. So we'll do build, and again, didn't get the help, so we'll type it out. And we need to make sure we're returning whatever we normally return, which is an instance of a game in this example. So we'll do build, and here we're going to return game.empty, and that's just what we originally were doing. And in our constructor, we also want to be calling all of this code that we normally were. So I'm going to grab these and put them here. Now we are seeing a lot of underlines. That's just because we haven't run the generator yet, but we will. Now there's one little catch here, and that's just with the way I'm doing this implementation. My update controllers kind of rely on state already existing. So if I do my update controllers, it's trying to get like the state.name, but we don't even have that yet. So I kind of have to just do something here where I go state equals game.empty, just to kind of set it so that these things know what to do. And then I still need to conform and return this. In theory, I guess I could just return state here, but I'm just going to do it this way. This is kind of a weird edge case. In most of my code, most of my examples and stuff, I don't even have too much happening in my constructors, but in this case I just found I had to do it this way to make this migration work. Another cool thing is we can get rid of ref completely. Normally we'd be passing that in and we'd be working with it, but when we're generating these things, we are actually automatically have ref access in the class at any point, so I can get rid of that. So we'll just save that, and we should see stuff generated, and we now have a game form provider, and it's doing a bunch of stuff, and everything's great. So let us just refresh again, green arrow. And hopefully I did this correctly. Go back here. So let's just edit this form. So we see the stuff's in there, and I'm just gonna make this test like 77, and it did update and everything is good. Okay, cool. All right, let's look at another type of provider. So those are both like state notifier providers. Nothing too fancy there between the two. Oh, we have an error here. Okay, we have an error, and the reason is because we're actually, and this is just a funny thing, because we made game form provider and we have game form here, but because we're importing in the game form provider as well, there's sort of a clash here. And a couple ways you could do it. You could obviously call it something different, like your component, and that's probably the best way to do this. And that's actually what I'm going to do for this. I'm going to call this, rename symbol game form component, just so we don't have that clash. And then we rename that, and then let's re-import this. So now we won't have two things named that. And hopefully, so when I rebuilt before, I don't think it actually rebuilt because there was an error in the code. So let's just make sure what we did was working. Okay, go here, we'll edit this, test 777, and there we have it, test 777, and hopefully over here, test 777. So stuff is working again with a little refactor. My mistake for not noticing that. All right, so another type of provider we have is our lovely detail provider, and this is a pretty common thing. This is using a future provider currently, and it still will be, just a little bit differently. And basically how this works is I can watch my game detail provider, and I'll just show you where it would be happening. It'd be happening in the game detail. So, it's actually happening in the game detail screen. So just as a reminder how this works, if you haven't watched the full video, we're actually watching the game detail provider, and this doesn't return a game. This returns an async value of possibly a nullable game. Which then we watch. So we see, when there's an error, we want to show error. When it's loading, we'll just do that. Actually, yeah, we'll look at the body. It's a little more clear. So data, when it's error, we're just going to put the error in a string in text. Otherwise, when it's loading, we're going to have a circular progress indicator. However, when there is a game, which technically can be null, according to this, see, it can be a null game. We want to check if it's null. We do game not found. If not, we just push that game through to this component called game detail, which just lays out stuff about the game. So, and the reason we sort of took this approach rather than the list passing stuff through, if you recall from the video, is, in web or in like a deep link, we want the screen itself to be able to have the smallest amount of data, meaning just really the game ID, which is like, a UUID, a unique identifier for the game, and be able to figure it out all on its own. So that's why we're using a feature provider here. And we're specifically using a family because we want a new instance of this for every unique identifier. So this is how it works in the legacy way. We basically say feature provider family. First, we pass in what that type of state is, which is a nullable game, and then the type of state or the type of variable the family identifier will be. This should be, in families, these should always be ideally they're primitive values, so something like a string or an int. But at the end of the day, they need to conform to using, if you're comparing two things, the equals value of it, which is something you can override in freezed and all that kind of stuff. That needs to work, meaning like you can't just pass in two models that are technically different from your point of view, but if you ran equals, they would still be considered the same. Just a small little side note there with families in general. So I usually just stick to using primitives because then, and usually for me it's like an ID, an integer, or a string. But basically, yeah, we construct it like that, and then this is the same parameter there. This correlates with that. That's just our widget ref, or our ref in general. And then we actually run the code. This is the asynchronous code. This is going off and fetching something from an API, and then we return the result. Because I'm using FP-Dart in this, it's a little bit, in a normal case, you'd probably just return the result right away, but I'm folding on it because technically this can be a string or a game, depending on if there's an error or not. If that's confusing to you, watch the previous videos and, it'll make a lot more sense. But neither here nor there. So what we're going to do is we're going to update this and use sort of the new syntax. So what we want to do is, I'm going to keep that up there for reference, but we're going to again import Riverpod, the annotation package. So let's put that up there. And we also need to do this because we're going to be using the generator. We're going to do part of game detail provider .g.dart. And now here we'll do keep alive as well. Keep alive true. I'm not sure why it's not liking anything right now, but maybe because I don't actually have the thing. So now here what we do instead, we want to say it's going to be a future and it's going to return a game, but it could be null. So we want to have the question mark there. And rather than calling this game detail provider, I'm going to call it game detail. And rather than this being a variable, it's actually a function now. So here, and the first thing we want to pass in is ref, and the second thing we want to pass in is the arg. And that's basically the same as this identifier here and this ref here. Then we're going to mark it as async, because obviously it's async. And we can take everything else and put it here. I'm going to comment this out. We'll save. And then I just had to make sure this says arg. I could call this ID, I guess, just to keep it exactly the same, but really it doesn't matter. You could call that hello world if you wanted. Okay, so we'll run our build runner again, although because I'm watching, I believe still, it should have already ran. And now, if we go back to this right here where we were watching it, I didn't have to change any code here. It's great. And I'm still getting back an async value of game, and I have my game detail provider. And if I click on this, though, I see like, oh, this generated code. And this is, the code that does all the, exciting stuff. And let's green arrow refresh and just make sure it worked. Oops, right here. So if I click on one of these, yep, everything seems to be working. And let's just make sure the invalidation is working. So for instance, if I edit this, test 456 and save, we should see on this screen it happens. And the reason that's happening, in case you, again, haven't watched the full video, if we go to our form provider, we're actually, when a success happens, we're actually invalidating the game detail provider with that game ID. So if it was already in memory, it'll invalidate it. And it invalidates, although I've been using this a lot longer than these new things. These invalidate came out at the same time in Riverpod 2. It's basically like a lazy version of refresh. It's a more clean one because it doesn't actually refresh the data at that time. It just marks it as if, hey, if you need this is invalid now. Next time you need this, actually go through the whole life cycle of it, which is super handy because you don't really want all these like network requests happening in the background if you're never going to even come to that screen again, or to another component that's watching it. Okay, so that's mostly everything I wanted to cover. There's one other thing I wanted to cover because it's a pretty common use case, and I don't actually have a version of it in here, so we're going to build something really quick. Let's imagine we had something like console. What's a better? Sorry, I'm thinking out loud right now. Yeah, let's call it like game console list provider .dart. So I'm just going to write how I would have done this the old way, right? And the idea of this is going to be a list of games, part of a specific console. So we might have something called like, game console list provider. And again, I'm writing this right now just as like the old way of doing it, so don't copy this. So this would be a state notifier, and we're going to still have a list of games like we did before. Oops, game. And I just need to import that. There we go. And we would have this super. We're going to start with an empty list. And then we might have like, a load function that does like, the async stuff here to actually get the list. And we want to make sure, when this initializes, we actually call load. I don't need that there. And so we do the things, cool. And then we would have something like, game console list provider equals state notifier provider. Now here, state notifier provider, I would use a family in this case, right? And that's really what I want to show how we could do this. And here we would actually have, maybe it's like console name, or it would probably be like console ID, right? And here we would essentially return this console list provider, and we would also want to be, so that this load function knows like what the console is, we'd want to be tracking this here. We'd have something called like ID, and or I'll even call it console ID just to make this really clear. And in our constructor, we would actually go this.console ID, and I'll just do console ID. So this, although I'm not going to like build the implementation for this, the difference here is instead of a global singleton that's all of our games, this is going to be potentially multiple ones based on a certain console. Now, how would we convert this to using the new Riverpod syntax? So what I'm going to do, I have this file. Where is this file in our list of providers? I'm going to save. I'm just going to rename this to, legacy, and we're going to make a new file, game console list provider .dart, and here we will do our lovely thing. So first of all, this will be part of game console list provider .g.dart. Then we would do our Riverpod syntax, which is not going to auto import for me. So let's just go to one of our other ones. Let's go to our list provider because it's in some ways going to be very simple to this, similar to this. So we have this right here. We're going to do keep alive true. We're going to make a class and we'll call it game console list, and it's going to extend to game console list. And here I'm just going to grab this over here, and we'll import in game, and we'll have our load function. And in fact, I'm going to just grab the same load function. The difference here is, we'd probably want to pass in like a console ID here, and Actually, we're not even going to pass it in. You'll see why. And then let's just imagine for a second, I'm just going to make a new, this won't actually work because I would need to build some stuff on the back end for this, list by console. But let's just pretend, we could pass in a console ID and it would somewhat get used in this HTTP request. So here we do list by console, and we'd want to pass in something which we don't have yet, and then we would get our state and everything's good. Okay, so if I generate this now, we'll see it's making some things, but we have the error of this not being passed in. So how do we convert this to a family? Because right now this isn't a family. Well, it's really easy. We just go string arg right here, and I'll rerun that. And now if we actually look at this, you'll actually see references to a family, because Riverpod generator is smart enough to know, oh, if there's a parameter going into the build, it knows that there's different things. And now here, arg, I believe this is something I can just access now anywhere in the code. So yeah, if I click arg here, it's actually this thing that was automatically put in, and we are good. So that's how you would do it with a family. Really, the only difference between here is we're adding a parameter to the build function here, and it knows that it will now become a family one, and then obviously we'll update our implementation to make use of that, however your application requires it. All right, that's all I wanted to cover here. Basically, I think this stuff's really great. I'm going to be migrating some other projects over to use this. One's obviously that I'm still actively working on, and moving forward we'll only be doing things this way. Shout out to Randall once again for pointing all this out to me and letting me know the error in my ways. And yeah, I hope this helps you have more fun in the Riverpod, Flutter, and Dart world. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.